On the many planes of the Magic the Gathering universe, there are few races as widely encountered on world after world and in as varied forms as the Goblins. Second only to humans and neck with elves in how universally present they are throughout the history of the game, Goblins can be found on all but a few of the known worlds. Their general visual identity was established fairly early on, but over the years we've seen a good bit of variety in how they are portrayed, both in terms of appearance as well as the roles they play on the multitude of planes they inhabit, more so than their elven counterparts, who more strictly stick to their one-with-nature shtick. Certain features tend to be common among the many varied goblin races. They tend to inhabit mountainous regions and are generally quite destructive, as befitting their association with red mana, and can be driven to recklessness by their bad impulse control. Many goblins use magic to harness the power of lightning or fire. Some have an affinity for artifacts, and almost always they tend to be found in great numbers due to their high birth rate. I'm going to lead you on a tour of the planes where we take a look at my favorite creature type in Magic. We shall start on the world that the game mostly spent its first decade on, Dominaria. With so much history to it, Dominarian goblins have come in quite likely the most shapes and sizes over the years that the game's story centered around the plane. Different sets portraying different areas as well as ages, the earliest events to the latest, several thousand years apart, and the kinds of goblins featured between sets, and even within them, differing from one another due to theming, as well as different artists' takes on them. It's tricky to try and accurately describe the goblins of Dominaria with all their world has gone through, from experiencing an ice age to parts of another plane merging with it, to time and reality twisting rifts threatening to tear the whole world asunder. They generally resemble the archetypical short green skins with pointy ears and noses that I think many of us imagine goblins to look like, but the sheer number of them created for so many cards makes for a lot of variety. Perhaps it's sufficient to say that through all the changes, the goblins have adapted and thrived every chance they get. From the artificial plane of wrath come the Mogs. Bred for battle by the sinister Phyrexians, they're much larger, more muscular, and even more vicious than most goblins. They have a unique, innate ability to sniff out magic, as well as distinctly sloped foreheads, the traces of which can be found in modern Dominarian goblins, particularly ones from the continent of Shiv, where after the Phyrexian invasion, surviving Mogs joined the native goblins. On Mercadia, goblins, known as the Kylem, were actually a dominant race on their world, making up the ruling class of Mercadia City after taking over running things on behalf of the decadent humans that were meant to be their masters. The Kylem actually originate from Dominaria, but have evolved to take on a taller, slimmer form, with less crude features and relatively high intelligence. Cowardly, cruel, and corrupt, they were eventually faced with a full-blown revolution. On another artificial world, Mirrodin, the goblins, much like all its other living species, have metal growing right out of their skin to adapt to their metallic environments, and three-toed, clawed feet to navigate their surroundings. While some have a knack for handling artifacts, mostly they focus on scrapping anything they can get their hands on and turning them into religious offerings. By the time the Mirrans found themselves besieged by Phyrexian corruption, the goblins seem to have changed in appearance, their heads taking on a very distinct shape with elongated skulls and great big maws, while metal actually growing from their bodies seems less prevalent. There's no real explanation given for this sudden change, though perhaps the goblins portrayed in the cards are of a specific, different-looking tribe. The goblins of Kamigawa are known as the Akki, which means little monsters. They're very distinct in appearance from other goblins, with the hard, spiked shells on their backs, bright orange skin, and particularly long and pointy noses. Akki can be quite foul-natured and are prone to playing pranks, sometimes rather dangerous ones, on outsiders as well as one another, and have a strong affinity to fire despite the snowy mountain region of Sokenzan they dwell in, even possessing resilience to the heat of lava. They've taken to venerating a particular great spirit, or kami, and even offering their own members to it as sacrifices. On the city plane of Ravnica, goblins can be found in significant numbers as part of 4 of the 10 great guilds. Among the militant peacekeepers, the Boros Legion, they often find themselves on the front line, positioned in front of less expendable troops. The primal Grul clans greatly value strength, and standing next to giants, ogres, and cyclopes, a goblin's ferocity can only get them so far. In the sadistic and hedonistic cult of Rakdos, many vicious goblins embrace the worst part of their nature, while in the innovative Izzet League, they often end up working as labor, or even as test subjects. Many guildless goblins find themselves joining gangs. Regardless of where they end up, goblins have to work hard to not be looked down upon, most significantly, some particularly intelligent ones finding a degree of acclaim among the Izzet through success with often risky experiments. The dual plane of Lorwyn Shadowmoor hosts easily the most diverse goblins among all the worlds of magic. On Lorwyn, the boggarts come in many shapes and even sizes, their heads and bodies varying from one individual to another to such a degree one could easily mistake two as members of different species. The shape and number of their horns unique to each one, they even come in wildly different colors from shades of green and red to even purple. They're gluttonous for experiencing new things, flavors, sounds, sights, but being unwilling to share is unacceptable as boggarts are highly communal. As the plane takes on the aspect of Shadowmoor, its residents change along with their world, and the boggarts, usually more mischievous than vicious, turn downright beastly, roaming gangs of marauders scouring the land in search of prey and consuming whatever they come across. They appear much more heavily built than their scrawny Lorwyn counterparts. In addition to boggarts, a number of other goblin subspecies appear while their world is in its darker phase. The forest-dwelling Spriggans are small and yellow in hue, and are able to grow to an enormous size at will. Hobgoblins are by far the most civilized of Shadowmoor's goblins. Living in cottages and wearing proper clothing, they've even domesticated giant cicadas. The murderous Redcaps dye their caps red with the blood of their victims. And finally, the peculiar Streamhoppers favor areas with running water as they jump about on their single leg. Alara is a plane once fragmented into 5 shards, and from the wild, volcanic shard of Jund comes another distinct, rodent-like brand of goblins. They are covered in fur, have short tails, and their faces end in elongated muzzles. In the kill or be killed hierarchy of Jund, goblins find themselves on the lowermost rung of the food chain among sentient races, and mostly survive through sheer numbers. They worship the dragons that hold dominion over Jund as apex predators, being devoured by one considered an honor, and many willingly offer themselves up to receive said honor. With the plane's fragments united into one, the goblins have since ventured out to explore more of their new world. On the plane of Zendikar, the local goblins have to struggle against the very environment they live in, as the alien infestation of titanic Eldrazi has the world in a constant state of upheaval. Zendikar goblins have adapted to their habitat, with longer than usual arms that help scaling cliffs and floating masses of land and the mystic hedrons that the goblins pry chunks off of. They actually consume the unique material these artifacts, created to direct the ley lines of mana, consist of in an attempt to ingest the hedron's power, which may factor into their rough skin and the hard protrusions many of them sprout from their bodies. Some goblins were driven deep underground into lightless caverns, where they further adapted by losing their now useless sense of sight entirely. In the wake of a final battle against the Eldrazi menace, the goblins stand united with the remains of the rest of the world's inhabitants as they begin rebuilding their ravaged world. Tarkir is a plane dominated by dragons. The 5 clans the world's residents are split into, each subservient to a great dragon lord. The plane's goblins have notably broad noses and thick patches of hair on their head and bodies. They're either of the Mardu Horde or the Temur Frontier. The Mardu are warriors hailing from the barren wastes of Tarkir, driven to raiding other clans by their native rocky steppes' lack of natural resources. The Mardu goblins join the other races that make up the Horde on their raids, despite usually missing out on the lion's share of the glory and spoils. The Temur goblins have coarse, insulating fur due to their snowy surroundings in the mountain ranges they inhabit, surviving however they can in the harsh environment and under the oppressive rule of their dragonic dictator, hoping not to end up as dragon-feed themselves. Onfiora is the high city of Pagliano, a grand metropolis of political intrigue and complex clockwork technology, where the goblins have been a downtrodden part of society. Only select individuals of remarkable talent have ever attained positions of any prestige. The recent political turmoil has wreaked havoc on order in the city, and plundering gangs of goblins rove the streets. Of the more traditional greenskin-type goblins, Fiorans notably seem to be the only ones that regularly sport facial hair, and also seem rather squat. Fiora is also home to the only known goblin planeswalker, Dareti, who had a hand in many of the world's technological advancements. The goblins of Ixalan are among the most physically distinct varieties. Hailing from the continent that shares the plane's name, they more than anything resemble blue monkeys with white fur. Upon the arrival of the Brazen Coalition on Ixalan's shores, the goblins took to the pirate life, scaling riggings and masts like the trees of their native jungle, eager to tackle even the most risky of tasks. On the plain of Bablovia, the Goblin Explosioneers are one of the 5 organizations that rule over the world, each one representing a facet of science. The Explosioneers came to be when the Goblin workers of Steamflogger Industries staged a coup and took over. Bablovian goblins have particularly prominent, pointy noses and long pointed ears, even more so than most goblins, and they are obsessed with explosions and hammers, and the promise of havoc is usually a sure bet to motivate them. The goblins of Kylem are the champions of big ears, even as they dream of being immortalized as the champions of Valor's Reach. Enamored with the excitement and showmanship of the combat sport martial magic, goblins pack the stands, sometimes even dressing up as their ferried combatant, eager to show their passion for their beloved sport.